We start a new project, very exciting, a classic Masechta. Shnayim ochsim b'talis. Ze omer ani mitzasiyah v'ze omer ani mitzasiyah. Ze omer kula shali v'ze omer kula shali. The arichus here in the Gemara is going to be, the arichus here in the Mishnah is going to be the subject of the Gemara. And that on two counts. Number one, because you have ani mitzasiyah and then you have a claim of kula shali. Why a double claim? Wouldn't it be enough to say ani mitzasiyah, or just enough to say kula shali? Secondly, why is each claim separated from the other one in a ze omer? The Mishnah could have easily have said ze omer ani mitzasiyah v'kula shali, v'ze omer ani mitzasiyah v'kula shali. That would have certainly been an abridged Mishnah. Let's also point out, as we begin this Masechta, that Rashi opens the Masechta by telling us Dafka ochazin, tishnei muchzakim ba. So what this means is that they're both holding on to the guf hatalis. They have equal grasp over the talis, and each one therefore has a chazaka. And that's going to be the key to understand yachloku. Even before we get to the shvua, which is the next subject of this case in the Mishnah, but as far as yachloku is concerned, what generates the yachloku, the chaluka, is the fact that they're both ochazin. And the Mishnah paskin zei yishav she'ein lo ba pachos michetzia, v'zei yishav she'ein lo ba pachos michetzia. Now it's interesting, each one is claiming the entire talus, that he picked up the talus first, and therefore he acquired ownership on the talus. And yet, the shvua that's formulated is ein li ba pachos michetzia. And the reason for this is because we don't want to institute and impose a shvua which could be a shvua sheker. We have every reason to believe the possibility that each one picked up the half of the talus simultaneously, and therefore it could very well be that each one has half the talus. And the shvua, therefore, is a shvuas emes. So when each litigant swears that he has at least a minimum of pachos, of at least a chetzia, and he doesn't have anything less than a chetzia, that shvua could be a shvuas emes. And we'll see later on, we'll take a quick peek here on Daf Beis Amid Beis, that the Gemara here has a case of ben nanas, and ben nanas says that we don't want to impose a shvua in a case where we know that the shvua will be a shvuas sheker, or at least one of the two shvuas will be a shvuas sheker. Okay, so we'll get to ben nanas in just a few minutes. So you'll see that like about 15 lines down from the top of the Omer, the ben nanas Omer ketzad elu ve'elu boim lidei shvuas shav. The achloku, and the Mishnah says we split the talus in half. It doesn't mean that we physically chop the talus up, but it means we sell the talus on the open market and split its value, its dummy. The Mishnah continues, in the second case in the Mishnah, one of the two litigants confesses that he doesn't own anything more than half the talus, whilst the other litigant claims the entire talus. And if the one who says the entire talus is mine, we're only going to award him 3/4 of the talus. There's going to be a yachloko on the half of the talus that they're debating about. So since he's going to be awarded 3/4 of the talus, his shvua reflects the fact that he owns at least a minimum of 3/4 of the talus. The the one who's claiming half the talis will be awarded a quarter of the talis, half of the half. Zenotel shlosh halachim, zenotel revia, and therefore each one will take the shvua on that part of the talis that he'll be awarded. The Mishnah continues: Hayishnayim rochven al gabi behema o shaya echad rochev echad manhig zel mer kulishli v'zel mer kulishli shava ze yishava shein lo ba pachos michetzia v'ze yishava shein lo ba pachos michetzia v'achloku. And this part of the Mishnah reflects in a mirror image the first part of the Mishnah, and the only difference being instead of a talis, it's a behema, but there are nuances of chidushim here in this part of the Mishnah in terms of rechiva and manhig. And this has to do with kinyonim and how you're kona behema. And finally, the Mishnah concludes by saying that bisman shein modim o sheyesh lehem edim cholkim below shvua. If each one accepts the argument of the other, then there's no need for a shvua. Alternatively, if any of the litigants has support from two witnesses, that exempts him from taking a shvua. The Gemara asks the following question. Now, before we see the Gemara, let's just point out that the Tosas Dibra Masli V'Yachloku is one of the most fundamental Tosas in Shas. I mean, you could write books on this little Tosas V'Yachloku. But basically, to summarize the main 3 points of this Tosas without learning it in depth, Tosas sets the 3 cardinal principles that apply in halacha for a suffix, for mamon hamuto b'suffix. One is Yachloku, the other is Kol Yolam Gover, and the third is Yehimunach Ad Sheyovo Eliyahu. Yachloku applies in our Mishnah, says Tosfos, because we have 2 conditions that are met. Condition number 1 is that each one has a chazakah. And we've already seen that in Rashi at the beginning, Dafka Ochazin. Condition number 2 is that there's no Vadai Rami, which means that it's very possible that they both picked up the talis simultaneously, and therefore Chaluka Yechola Lios Emes. And in those 2 conditions, we will apply the principle of Yachloku. The second principle, Kol Yolam Govar, will apply when there's no chazakah. And if there's no chazakah, Bezdin basically are misalik themselves. They remove themselves from the case and they say, you guys fight it out. Nobody has proof. For example, in the case of a boat, each one claiming the boat is his, no one has a claim. Tomorrow, a third person could come in and say it's his boat. And therefore, Kol B'Yom Govar, which means that Bezdin doesn't get involved. I call it the non-involvement theory. We have to point out that in the case of a boat, we could theoretically apply Yachloku if they would have been Ochazin, because Hachaluk Yichol Lios Emes, which means that it's feasible, although not likely, that they both owned the boat b'shutfus in partnership. However, in the third category of Yehi Munach, which is also known as Mana Shlishi, and that's going to be the sugya here on Daf Gimel, we're talking about a case where 2 people were mafkid money in the hands of a third person. One was mafkid 200, the other was mafkid 100, and each one is claiming that he was the one who was mafkid the 200. And there's going to be a machlokas tanoim had a paskin, but the fundamental principle is yehei munach, which means we give Bezdin sort of like an escrow status. They hold on to the money until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Now, in this case, they both have a chazaka, and that's because the nifkad is holding on to the money on behalf of both of them. However, it's eina chaluka yichol lios emes, and therefore we cannot paskin yachloku. So once again, just to summarize, the 2 conditions that Tosfos postulates for Yachloku are, number 1, they both have chazaka, number 2, chaluki yichol lios emes. There's another part of this Tosfos that has to do with Sumchus, and perhaps we'll have time at the end of the Shir when we get to Sumchus at the end of Daf Beis Amid Beis to discuss the last part of Tosfos. The Gemara asks the following: Lama li lemisne ze omer ani mitzasiv ze omer nitziv ze omer kul shali ze omer kul shali. Why the double claim? Listen, the Mishnah could have had chada chada ktani. The Mishnah could have had either ze omer ani mitzasiya v'kula shali, and the other one saying ze omer ani mitzasiya v'kul shali. Or alternatively, the Mishnah could have said Zelmer ani mitzasiya v'zelmer ani mitzasiya, or Zelmer kulashali v'zelmer kulashali. But listening ani mitzasiya v'ano yadana the kulashali, the Gemara argues logically that if he's claiming he found the talus, then we understand that his claim is that he owns the entire talus. And the Gemara answers the following. Itana animitzasia, to justify why we need a claim of animitzasia now, Mishnah, and that's going to come later on in the Gemara, but why do we need the kula shali, and how do we justify that animitzasia itself is not a sufficient taina? Havamina my mitzasia re'isia, we would have interpreted that mitzasia means I saw it first, afagadat v'lo asili yadeh, even though he hasn't made a kinyan and he hasn't lifted the garment. And I would have thought nahava mina b're'iyah bi'alma koni, that you could be kone something mina hefker through re'iyah alone. And Tosfos, as a matter of fact, has a Gemara, which you'll see 2 lines before the end of the Amud, and the Gemara is later on in Daf Kuf Yud Ches, where habata behefker kani. So there does seem to be a precedent for making a kinyan in hefker through habata, just simply looking at it. Like I once heard from my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, that when Moshe Rabbeinu was told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you won't cross the Jordan, but you can climb up to the mountain and see the land. So Rav Soloveitchik understood that when Moshe saw the land from Har Levanon, at that point he sanctified the entire land of Eretz Yisrael through Re'iyah. It's just simply by seeing it. In any event, the Gemara has a havamina that you could be konim in a hefker through Re'iyah. Tana Kula Shali, that the Mishnah says, no, it's not enough that he claims Mitzasiya Re'isiya, but he also has to claim Kula Shali, which means that I made the kinyan and I lifted up the talus before he did. The Re'iyah lo kan. Mari asks, Umimatzis Amriku, we really have a havamina that my Mitzasiya, the word Mitzasiya means Re'isiya, I saw it, Vaha Omer Avnoi. Others have a girsa Ravina. Umatsasa di asi liyade bashma. That when you claim that you found something, it means that it came into your possession. And the Gemara says in Umatsasiya dekra di asa liyade mashma. When the Torah used the word mitzasiya, that means it came into his hands. But that's not really the Lashon B'nai Adam. In other words, in the vernacular, in the common usage of language, when a person says Ani Mitzasiya regarding something that's lying in the street and it's hefker, he means that he saw it. Umi utanu lishna di almanakat umidichazile omrano ashkechis afagav delo asi liyade and bariya b'almakoni. So that when a person says, I found it, what he means to say is that I saw it before anyone else saw it. And therefore I acquired ownership over it, mina hefker, through re'iyah, even though I didn't make a kinyan on it. It's tani kulashali, therefore the Mishnah had to specify and add kulashali to re'iyah bi'almalo kanile, that he cannot be kona through re'iyah. Now the Gemara switches it around. What justifies the additional claim of an imitzasiya? If he's saying kula shali, which means, as we interpreted it, that he picked up the talis first and he made a kinyan agba, then why do you have to add ani mitzasiyah? It's totally superfluous. And the Gemara answers, "Itana kula shali avamina bi alma diktani mitzasiyah b're'iyah bi alma kani." It could be that, as a general rule, when a person claims ani mitzasiyah, he meant that he saw it, and therefore Tani ani mitzasiyah, the Mishnah was justified in adding ani mitzasiyah v'hadar tana kula shali, so that the extra words in the Mishnah would be indicative of the fact that he actually picked up the talis. The Mishnah Yisei Rashmini de Re'iyah lo kani, and the Mishnah is teaching us that Re'iyah is not a kinyan. Frek the Gemara, Mimotzis Amrid Chadak Tani. You're talking about an assumption in interpreting the Mishnah that he said both ani mitzasiyah and kula shali. And this was all the words and his claim in Bezdin. Can't be. For zev zek tani, zeh omer ani mitzasiyah, zeh omer ani mitzasiyah, zeh omer kula shali, zeh omer kula shali. From the fact that the Mishnah split it in half, we see that there are two different cases here. There's one case in which each one of the two litigants claims ani mitzasiyah. There's another case, another scenario, in which each one of the litigants claims kula shali. And now we have to figure out what are these two cases and why are they necessary. Amrav Papi, Temrav Shimi Bar Ashi, Amrile Kidi, a chacham by the name of Kidi, Reisha b'Metziya v'Seifa b'Mekachu Memka. That there are two different cases. One case addresses a hefker, an object that was lost and is ownerless, and the two litigants, each one claim ani mitzasiyah means I found it, I picked it up. Again, the Ramban here has a problem. How do you know that ani mitzasiyah means I picked it up? Because now we're saying that the additional claim of kula shali was for a different case of mekachu memkar. That's a problem. What's the case of mekachu memkar? Two people claim to have purchased the object from the seller. The seller himself does not know which one of them actually got there first and bought it. And somehow he mistakenly accepted money from both of them. Now, again, the Gemara is telling us now that in that case of kula shali mekachu memkar, we're going to do yachloku b'shvua. Now, I understand that yachloku b'shvua means hachaluka yichol lios emes, because it is theoretically possible that the mocher sold it to both of them. And since he saw that both of them were so eager to purchase the object, he says, okay, split it between the two of you. However, where's the ochazin? We said that according to Tosfos, the precondition for yachloku is that each one has a chazaka. So that's very difficult. Now, Rashi adds another point here that's very, very important. If you take a look at the last Rashi on the Amud, he says, if two people are holding on to a beged, each one claiming I wove the beged, Rashi says lo yachloku. Even though they're both holding on to the beged, they both have a chazaka, we will not apply the principle of yachloku, but rather we will compare this case to Mana Shlishi. And we said that before in Mana Shlishi, there's a chaluka eina yichol lios emes, and therefore the halacha is yemunach ad shiov elio. Rashi says haniraktia is eina chaluka yichol lios emes because each one's claiming he created the beged, and therefore it's his. Utsricha, the last word on the Omid Utsricha. What's Utsricha? The Gemara now on Daf Beis Amid Beis that we're going to learn in Mitz Hashem addresses the question: why do we need two cases, both of which have the same psak halacha called yachloku? One case is when they're arguing about who picked up the talis first, mina hefker, and the other case is who bought the object that was sold, the merchandise was sold.